Hi everyone, Dave here at East Rosebud Fly and Tackle in Billings, Montana. Today we're going to tie a crane fly larva. This is a John Barr pattern. Charlie Craven does a great job showing us how to tie this in his book entitled Nymphs. Let's briefly talk about the importance of crane flies. The crane flies belong to the Diptera family, the same as with chironomids. The crane flies, there's over 3,000 species worldwide and about 1,500 in North America. And even though a third of the two-winged flies belong in the chironomid family, the crane flies are an amazingly diverse group of flies. They typically take up about another third of the Diptera family. Like I say, 1,500 species in North America. About 25% of crane flies are truly aquatic, in that they spend their entire life, they have a complete metamorphosis from egg to larva to pupa to adult. The other 75% are actual terrestrial. They can do extreme crop damage, particularly in monoculture like corn and things like that. They feed on the roots of these plants. Farmers call them leather jackets because when they turn over the soil, they see them in their pupal stage. All crane fly larvae pupate in soil. Even if the larvae are aquatic, which the 25% of them are, they migrate to the shoreline, burrow into the soil, and pupate. Now most of them are half an inch to an inch long like this, but some are as long as 2 inches, so they can be a big bite for a trout. The beaver head is probably our classic river for crane flies. It has a couple of things that make it very favorable for crane fly production. One, it has small gravel, silty type of a soil in the stream bottom, so it makes it easy for the larvae to dig into that. They are gatherers, they eat detritus and other organic materials. The beaver head is also almost completely stream side covered with willows. So this mix of roots and the clay in the soil makes it easy for these crane fly to burrow into this root system so that they can pupate. Then of course the adults come out in midsummer. Everybody knows what an adult crane fly looks like. It looks like a big gangly mosquito. And the fish feed avidly on those adults. And one of these times I'll tie a skater pattern for you for the crane fly adult. But the times when the crane fly larvae are most visible to the trout is during high water periods, typically in the springtime when there's some erosion of the bottom materials and also some erosion of the soil underneath these willow roots. And these crane fly larvae are exposed to the trout, and they're a big bite. And typically streams like the beaverhead are fished with drift boats, so these flies are plopped right up against the bank, allowed a short drift, and picked up and fished again. So with that said, we're going to tie this fairly heavily weighted with wire, since the way these are fished are tied up against the bank. I am using you can tie these from sizes 4 to 10, the 3X long hook. This will be a size 8 today. I'm using a fairly heavy thread because I'm going to show you a different way to dub a large body like this without using a direct dub. First thing we're going to do is take off some .025 lead wire, and we're going to wrap this fairly heavily, again because the way this is usually fished is from a drift boat and plunked right up against the roots of these willows. Scissors here. I also tie some of these lightly weighted to fish in the shallower areas downstream of these eroding riffles. It can also be effective. Now we get this nice and compacted, like the end of the wire about even with the hook point. This gives me room to tie in tailing material. It also gives me room at the head to finish off the fly. First thing we're going to do is tie in a tail, a very short tail. I'm going to be using parapost wing. You can also use something like McFlylon or polypropylene yarn. And I'm just going to tie in a short section here. I should start my thread first. I'm using a heavy 3/0 uni thread. It really helps with this dubbing process. Start my thread, I bring my tag end back, bring my thread around the back of the lead, and trap this tag end. This way I can snug up the lead. Also, when I wrap my thread through the lead wraps won't separate because that intervening tag allows the thread to stay on top. So that's a neat little trick. We'll go ahead and wrap thread to the back of the shank and then bring it right behind the lead wire. Part of the reason why we're using a double tail is to help to build up this area so that we don't have such an abrupt gap between the end of the lead and the end of the fly. So a couple of tight turns of thread, then we're going to pull this parapost material back and wrap over it. So you can see how that parapost material effectively helped to bridge this gap between the end of the lead and the end of the tail. Now, crane flies don't really have tails. They have what are called prolegs, very, very short legs on the back. So we're going to trim this just to the end of the curve of the hook. A little short stub of a tail like that. All right, we'll bring our thread back forward to the middle of the hook. Our ribbing is going to be some 3X monofilament tippet. Never throw your old tippet away, although you should probably throw it out every year, but keep some of the material for your fly tying needs. We're simply going to trap this with the thread. Tippet is slick, so make sure you make firm thread wraps. We're going to keep it on the far side of the hook, wrap down to the tail, and then come back forward. Go ahead and get the tippet material out of the way. Now for our back, I'm using some thin skin. This is the thin skin fly specs, tan on black. I've cut a strip out that's a little narrower than hook gap in width. When you cut a strip of thin skin off, do not peel the thin skin all the way off the cardboard backing. All it will do is roll up and make a blob that you'll find impossible to work with. So I only cut off enough cardboard to expose the area I want to work with. So we're going to start our thin skin right here at the back third. We want to make a soft loop around it, and this again is where heavy thread helps. We want to fold this over the hook shank right on top of the hook so that it's nice and centered, so that when we pull it forward it'll still be centered on the hook. Now there's an interesting dubbing technique we're going to use with this fly. Like anything, it takes a little bit to learn, but once you get it down, you'll find that it's a much faster way to dub a large area. Instead of a direct dubbing, which we'd end up probably with a foot of thread by the time we were finished, or a dubbing loop, and we don't really need long threads, we're going to use a different method. Now the dub that I'm using, I've just blended some sow scud dub. I'm using some smoky olive, and I blended it with some tan. Most of these crane flies are an olive tannish colored. So what we're going to do here, we're going to dub back, and then we're going to dub forward to make a really nice heavy body. So I've kind of got my dubbing here and just stretch it out a little bit. We're going to start the tip of it here just like we normally would. Get it nice and tight on the thread. Now the trick is to keep your dubbing parallel with the thread. As we wrap it, the dubbing will come off of our skein, as you can see here, and we're wrapping the dubbing with the thread at the same time. You can control the thickness of the dubbing by how heavy you have it down here. I'm letting it get away a little bit here. Like I say, it takes a little practice, but it's a very, very efficient way to dub heavily and to dub quickly. If you start losing it, just twist a little bit more around the thread until you have something like this. And as we get back towards the head, I'm going to allow it to thin up, not that thin. I think I said it takes a little bit of practice. You start it a little bit there, thin it out towards the head, like so. Okay? So, say that's a pretty clever way to dub heavily and to dub quickly. And then we'll get the rest of this, tie it down. Now we're simply going to bring our thin skin forward over the top. I'll strip a little bit more cardboard off of this. Make sure it's over the top of the fly. Another reason for using heavy thread when we're tying down thin skin is that a lighter, smaller diameter thread can cut the thin skin, which is the last thing you want to do at this point. Again, I'm going to use a soft wrap. Make sure that my thin skin is folded around the hook. Pull it a little bit towards the eye to tighten it up. And then make a few more firm wraps once you have some underlayer thread. That way you won't cut the thin skin. Alright, now we're going to take our 3X mono. With each wrap, I try to make sure that the edges of the thin skin are folded down and not lifted up by the tippet material. Make your wraps firm. Really dig it down into the back and through the dubbing of this fly, and make sure you're not bringing any dubbing up on the top. You can make as many segments as you want. Again, really pull down on that tippet material to make sure it digs down in there. Then when we get to the head of the fly, tie this off. Remember that mono is slick, so use several tight thread wraps. Cut off the end, and then we'll whip finish right behind the head. Not quite done with this pattern. Now we're going to pick out this bottom material. For me, the fastest way to do this on a larger fly is to simply use a brass bristle cleaning brush. You can use a variety of other tools. We're just going to scrub this back and forth a little bit. This quickly lifts out those hairs. This is one of the reasons why we dubbed it not only heavily, but forward and back to make sure we had plenty of dubbing material here. And again, crane flies don't really have legs, but this will give us a little bit of extra movement as this fly is in the water. Once we scrubbed it out, I'm going to trim these fairly close to the bottom of the body, like so. And then finally, just a little head cement. So anyway, that's an interesting tie for a crane fly. If you use this dubbing technique, it really does not take very long. You can whip several of these out every hour. So if you're ever in an area where you've got stream banks that are full of willows, it's a good area for crane flies. Try chunking some of these heavy flies right up against the bank and see what happens. As always, thanks for joining. We'll see you next time.